Welcome back students. This is your Sujit sir and in today's class we will discuss the second part of the story, The Best Christmas Present in the World. I hope all of you remember what we have read in the previous part of the story. Yes, my dear students, in the previous part of this story, we came to know that the narrator had found a letter while he was opening the drawers of his roll-top desk. The roll-top desk that he had purchased from a certain junk shop. For some time, he thought he should not open the letter. But thereafter, out of curiosity, he took the letter out of its envelope and read the content of it. The letter, which was actually written by Mr. Jim McPherson from the battlefield to his loving wife, Mrs. Jim McPherson. Now, in this part of the story, let us find out what the letter was all about. Dearest Connie, now Jim McPherson lovingly called his wife Connie. Dearest Connie, I write to you in a much happier frame of mind because something wonderful has just happened that I must tell you about at once. So the day when Jim McPherson was writing this letter to his loving wife Connie, he was in a very happy mood. And why was he so happy? Because something wonderful had happened in the battlefield. And in this letter, Jim McPherson narrates to his wife about that incident. And Jim McPherson doesn't want to delay in telling his wife what exactly happened on that day. He says, we were all standing to in our trenches. Now we here refers to the British soldiers, and Jim McPherson was an officer in the British Army, and the British were fighting against the Germans. So the British soldiers were all taking their positions. Here standing refers to taking up of position. And where were they taking positions? In our trenches. Trenches are long deep ditches in the ground for the soldiers to protect themselves from the enemy attack. We have often seen in movies or elsewhere that while the soldiers move forward, they dig a kind of deep drain or ditch where they can stay for some time and they can protect themselves from the enemy fire. So, the British soldiers were all taking their positions in the trenches. And it was a Christmas morning. It was crisp and quiet all about. Crisp here means cool and fresh. The morning was very cool and fresh. And quiet all about, there was an absolute quietness all around. As beautiful a morning as I have ever seen. As if Jim McPherson had never seen such a refreshing and cold morning as it was. As cold and frosty as a Christmas morning should be. A Christmas morning is generally expected to be something like this. It should be frosty, it should be cold enough. Christmas is celebrated in the winter season. Therefore, it is very natural that there will be cold and frost. I should like to be able to tell you that we began it. But the truth, I am ashamed to say, is that Fritz began it. Now Fritz is a common name for the Germans. Germans are often called as Fritz. Now Jim said to his wife Connie, it would have been great if I could have been able to tell you that it was we and not they who started everything. But the fact is that it was they who began. And what did they begin? That is, what did the Germans begin? It was they who gave the proposal of celebrating the Christmas together first. In other words, the proposal of celebrating the Christmas came from their side first. First, someone saw a white flag waving from the trenches opposite. Then they were calling out to us from across no man's land, "Happy Christmas, Tommy! Happy Christmas!" One of us, that is, one of the British soldiers, first saw someone waving a white flag from the opposite side. Means one of the German soldiers was waving a white flag from their territory. Now, white flag symbolizes peace. In fact, the color white stands for peace and harmony. Then they started greeting us. "Happy Christmas, Tommy! Happy Christmas!" Now, who is referred to as Tommy? As the German soldiers are called Fritz. Similarly, the British are called Tommy. When we had got over the surprise, some of us shouted back, "Same to you, Fritz, same to you." I thought that would be that. We all did. When we came out of the surprising occurrence, some of our soldiers also greeted them back, saying, "Happy Christmas, Fritz, Happy Christmas." So in that way, they exchanged their greetings on Christmas. And I thought it would be up to this. It would be ended with that formal exchange of greetings only. But then suddenly, one of them was up there in his grey greatcoat and waving a white flag. "Don't shoot, lads," someone shouted. And no one did. Then there was another Fritz up on the parapet and another. "Keep your heads down," I told the men. "It's a trick." But it was not. But then suddenly one of the German soldiers came out of their trench wearing his grey coat and waving a white flag. Lads often referred to young boys, here referring to the soldiers. So no one from either side fired any bullet. Then another German soldier came out of the parapet. Now, parapet means a kind of defensive wall along the top of a trench. And then a third soldier came out. I commanded my soldiers to keep their heads down. I thought it to be a trick of the Germans, as if they were trying to befool us. But finally, I realized that no, it was not at all a trick. Rather, it was their genuine wish to celebrate the Christmas together. One of the Germans was waving a bottle above his head. "It is Christmas Day, Tommy. We have snaps, we have sausage. We meet you." Yes, by this time there were dozens of them walking towards us across no man's land, and not a rifle between them. Little Private Morris was the first up. "Come on, boys, what are we waiting for?" And then there was no stopping them. Now, one of the German soldiers was waving a bottle and wanted us to share that with them. They said they had snaps. Now, what is snaps here? Snaps is a German drink made of grain. They said they had sausage also. Now, sausage is also a food item. It is in the shape of a cylindrical length stuffed with minced pork. They wanted to meet with us. A moment later, many were coming out to the no man's land. No man's land means an area of land unoccupied by any side or any country. They were not carrying any rifle with them, so there was no question of hostility. There was one from our side called Little Private Morris, who was the first to come out from our trench, and finally there was no stopping. We all met each other in the middle, that is, in the no man's land. I was the officer. I should have stopped them there and then, I suppose. But the truth is that it never ever occurred to me I should. All along their line and ours, I could see men walking slowly towards one another. Grey coats, khaki coats meeting in the middle. And I was one of them. I was part of this. In the middle of the war, we were making peace. So, being an officer in the English army, I could have stopped my men. But honestly speaking, Connie, it never for once occurred to me that I should stop them. The British and the Germans wearing the khaki and the grey uniform respectively were meeting with each other in the middle. I also participated in that, and we were making peace in the middle of the war. You cannot imagine, dearest Connie, my feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer who approached me, hand outstretched. Hans Olaf, he said, gripping my hand warmly and holding it. I am from Dusseldorf. I play the cello in the orchestra. Happy Christmas. Captain Jim MacPherson, I replied. And a happy Christmas to you too. I am a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Jim said to his wife, you can't imagine how happy I was when Hans Olaf, a German officer, reached out his hand towards me. And gripping my hand, he informed me that he was from Dusseldorf. He also said that he played cello in the orchestra. Well, cello is a musical instrument larger in size than a violin. He greeted me Happy Christmas. I introduced myself as Jim MacPherson and I also greeted him the same. I also told him that I was a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Dorset, he smiled. I know this place. I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage. And we talked. Connie, how we talked. He spoke almost perfect English. But it turned out that he had never set foot in Dorset, never even been to England. He had learned all he knew of England from school and from reading books in English. The German officer told me that he knew the place Dorset very well. Then we shared my rum ration. Now, rum ration is the daily amount of rum given to the soldiers. We also shared the sausage that he had brought with himself. Jim also told his dear wife that they talked for a long time. According to Jim, the German officer knew English quite well, although he had never ever came to Dorset, not even to England. He knew a great deal about England only through books. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy. His favorite book, Far from the Madding Crowd. So out there in no man's land, we talked of Bathsheba and Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Troy and Dorset. He also told Jim that Thomas Hardy was his favorite author and the book he liked the most was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy, as we all know, was an English poet and a novelist of the Victorian period. We were also talking about Bathsheba and Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Troy and Dorset. Now, Bathsheba, Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Troy are references from literature and mythology. He had a wife and one son, born just 6 months ago. As I looked about, there were huddles of khaki and grey everywhere, all over no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating. Now, huddles means a group of or a crowd of. He told me that he had a wife and a son, aged 6 months only. I saw the Germans and the British gathered together in the no man's land. Everywhere there were khaki and the grey. They were smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, and sharing their food. Hans Olaf and I shared what was left of your wonderful Christmas cake, Connie. He thought the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. I agreed. We agreed about everything. And he was my enemy. There never was a Christmas party like it, Connie. Now, Jim told his wife that he and Hans Wolf, the German officer, shared the remaining part of the wonderful Christmas cake that she had made, that is, Connie had made for Jim. Now, marzipan is a kind of sweet cake coated with chocolate. He said, that is, the German officer said that it was the best cake he had ever had. I was also of the same opinion that it was the best cake. We also agreed to all other matters. And surprisingly, he was my enemy. So, being an enemy, it is natural that their opinions should differ, but they were of the same opinion. Jim told his wife that he had never seen such a Christmas as that. Then someone, I don't know who, brought out a football. Great coats were dumped in piles to make goalposts, and the next thing we knew, it was Tommy against Fritz out in the middle of the no man's land. Then one of them brought a football, and the great coats, referring to the Germans, dumped in the middle, that is, they gathered in the no man's land. I knew what was going to happen, that it was going to be a football match between the British and the Germans. Hans Wolf and I looked on and cheered, clapping our hands and stamping our feet to keep out of the cold as much as anything. Then both of us, that is, I and the German officer, Hans Wolf, shouted to encourage the players. We also clapped, and that kept us away from the cold also. There was a moment when I noticed our breaths mingling in the air between us. He saw it too and smiled. Jim McPherson, he said after a while, I think this is how we should resolve this war. A football match. No one dies in a football match. No children are orphaned. No wives become widows. I also felt the breaths of the British and the Germans mingling, that is, intermixing in the air. There was, at that moment, no division between us. Later, he suggested that we should resolve every war with the help of such a football match. He said that football match was of course a better way because no one dies in a football match, no child becomes parentless, and no wife becomes a widow. I would prefer cricket, I told him. Then we Tommies could be sure of winning probably. We laughed at that and together we watched the game. Sad to say, Connie, Fritz won 2-1. But as Hans Wolf generously said, our goal was wider than theirs, so it wasn't quite fair. I replied that cricket would be better because Tommies, that is the British, play cricket better than football. There was a probability that the British might win if cricket was played instead of football. Jim then said to his wife that the German soldiers won by 2-1, means the Germans scored 2 goals and the British scored 1 goal only. But then Hans Wolf said that our goal was wider than theirs, and that is why they scored 2 goals easily, and therefore it was not fair. The time came, and all too soon, when the game was finished, the snaps and the rum and the sausage had long since run out, and we knew it was all over. I wished Hans well and told him I hoped he would see his family again soon, that the fighting would end and we could all go home. So that way the entire episode came to an end with great joy. I wished Hans Wolf and told him that very soon he would return home and meet his wife and son. And so would all the soldiers on both the sides. I think that is what every soldier wants on both sides. Han Solo said, "Take care, Jim MacPherson. I shall never forget this moment, nor you." He saluted and walked away from me slowly, unwillingly. I felt. He turned to wave just once and then became one of the hundreds of grey coated men drifting back towards their trenches. So he was also of the same opinion. He showed his concern about me. He said that he would never forget that moment, although it lasted for a short time during the war. Then he walked away slowly as if he did not want to go. While returning to his trench, he once turned back and waved me, and then mixed with the other German soldiers. Drifting here means driven away. That night, back in our dugouts, we heard them singing a carol and singing it quite beautifully. It was Still Natch, in other words, Silent Night. Our boys gave them a rousing chorus of While Shepherds Watched. We exchanged carols for a while and then we all fell silent. We had our time of peace and goodwill, a time I will treasure as long as I live. Jim informed his wife that when the Germans returned to their trenches, they were beautifully singing a carol. Carol here refers to a song of joy. It is a song especially sung on the Christmas Eve. Our boys, that is the British soldiers, also sang a chorus of While Shepherds Watched. Finally, everything turned silent. It was a great time that both of us enjoyed. Jim told Connie that he would remember that till his last breath. Dearest Connie, by Christmas time next year, this war will be nothing but a distant and terrible memory. I know from all that happened today how much both armies long for peace. We shall be together again soon, I am sure of it. At last, Jim promised his dearest wife that he would be at home by the next Christmas and that the war would be nothing but a terrible memory by then. He also seemed to be convinced that both the armies wanted peace. Jim finally assured Connie that he would be together with her very soon. Your loving Jim. So that's the letter which Jim MacPherson had written to his dearest wife, Mrs. Jim MacPherson, while he was away in the battlefield. And the narrator got the letter from the roll top desk, and here we have read the content of the letter. Now let us see what the narrator does next. So with this we come to the end of the second part of this chapter. Thank you so much.